After e4, c6, knight c3, d5, knight f3, we're fighting the Caro-Kann with the two knights. In this video, we're going to go through all the things we haven't seen. Let's start with a couple of lines from the bishop g4 move. Okay, so now as we know, we've seen in the previous video, we have to attack the bishop, and in the variation where they take, there's this extremely boring and annoying e6 move. This setup, as we know, there's nowhere good to put this bishop. We're going to play bishop e2. Now, the novelty here would be knight d7. Then there's another move. There's another novelty that starts from knight f6, and then you'll see it. Let's start with knight d7. We've never seen this before, although it's likely to transpose d4. And after pawn takes, knight takes back, and now knight f6. This is a position that is often easily reachable. However, we haven't really seen it before. So after knight f6, we castle. And after knight takes and queen takes and knight f6, this is the plan that every Caro-Kann player will do. Basically, they play knight d7 to protect knight f6 in case we want to take the knight. So they can take back, and now comes with the attack on the queen. We just have to mess around a bit. Queen f4 to keep defending the pawn in d4. Bishop d6 attacking the queen. This is all... of course, it's not like we're going to f4 so that we can get attacked with tempo. We're going to play queen f3 now. And after castling, we finalize with rook d1. This is how you develop. So what is the advantage? The advantage is that we're playing with the bishop pair, but nothing more than that. That's why I really hate the Caro-Kann, because, you know, the game is just boring. Let's see how to take it. However, white is better here. Rook d1, and now bishop c7 with the idea of queen d6. This is an idea that I haven't really explored, and it's important. You just have to play g3 here, as everything's safe. And now you'll see what the plan is. A move like knight d5 is thematic here. They always want to play this move. The knight is well placed, but it doesn't work because you will play c4, and after the knight goes to b4, threatening c2, you play queen b3, and that's it. That already does the job, because you're skewering the knight and winning that pawn. Even if the knight is defended, you can attack it with the pawn. You're going to b7 with no compensation, and so that plan doesn't work. So now we know how to fight that boring plan. Instead of knight d5, what about queen e7? Obviously, queen d6 is a waste of time. King g2, and that is how we're going to be playing this. Rook a to d8, developing. c3, create this pawn chain. Always create this pawn chain against the Caro-Kann. Two options, and then we're going to change line. c5 is a thematic move, or e5. c5, you will take the pawn in b7. There are no compensation. There's nothing here. Although it looks like pawn takes, and now, yes, they are going to isolate our pawn. That is true. However, rook to d8, you just play queen a7 and protects the pawn. And you're gonna have to take it from there, but there's no compensation because we got two passed pawns on the queen side, and we're gonna use them to win this game. So in this position, instead of c5, what about e5? This is a thematic move as well. Take, rook back to e1. So now, after queen to d5, looking for swap, you play c4, attacking the queen. So, yeah, we're not going to give up the bishop pair. This is how we're going to retain the advantage. Queen moving just allows us to develop. So if queen takes and bishop takes, this is an extremely boring game. It happens a lot. Rook f to e8 and bishop to g5 now. So it's a very boring opening. It's not sharp. There's no way that you can take a massive advantage at the beginning like we do in so many of the other openings and defenses that I've been going through in my channel. Unfortunately, when you're dealing with the Caro-Kann, you are dealing with, you know, a game where you have to take advantage little by little because it's too solid. Anyway, the good news is that black doesn't have any advantage at all. Bishop e5, targeting a weak pawn, relatively weak. Rook a to d1. We really don't care. Also, because if the pawn goes there, then rook to b2 eventually, rook to b1, you're going to the 7th rank. The best shot will be rook takes, h6 attacking the bishop, and now the bishop is also because we were pinning the knight, so the knight couldn't really move. The knight cannot really move now either. There's no squares where the knight could have gone to, so bishop e5 was a crucial move to defend this knight. So obviously I'm playing the best moves for black. If black doesn't play the moves I'm showing, it's because they're playing even stupider mistake, and you can punish it. Here now you have to play bishop e3, save the bishop pair, a6, b4. We're going to start pushing these pawns. And after bishop c3, attacking the pawn, you play rook to b1. You're going to have to take it from here. As you notice, the two bishops cannot be challenged by the opponent. The king is extremely safe. There's no queen on the board. And you're just going to be pushing these pawns, taking everything, and then finally win on b7. So let's take it from the start. and look at the other one. So bishop g4, h3, take, e2, bishop, e6, bishop e2. And now with the early knight f6, we've seen this extensively. We know how to castle now, bishop e7, d4, and after pawn take, we obviously cannot take the knight because then the pawn in d4 drops. Queen e3 is the move. Knight to d5 now, and now we have to capture this pawn with the queen. So in the past we went through all sorts of stuff, knight d7 and so on. Knight c3 is the novelty. We've never seen it before. So pawn takes back, knight to d7 with the idea of going to f6. It's fine. You know that there's nothing you can do to stop it. It is going to happen. Don't try to stop it. Just play rook b1. Don't waste time. Develop. Knight f6, queen f3. The queen will always be hanging around f4 and f3. Queen d7 to protect the pawn and develop. c4 is the move now. Obviously taking here means losing this pawn. Castle. And now rook to d1. Rook f to e8. Bishop f4. Rook a to d8. How is it that we have an advantage? Well, the bishop pair and the fact that we are not going to lose the bishop pair. c5 comes now. You'll see why in a second. Knight d5 appears to be possible, but you play bishop e5. And the usual idea of playing c4 as well. What about bishop f6, challenging our bishop? Well, fine, we're going to have to give up the bishop pair, but it comes with an attack on this knight. And then when we take the bishop, it's going to isolate this pawn. We're also going to take the pawn in f6. It's a winning position, obviously. So bishop kind of has to take our bishop. And then we take this one. And now there's an attack on the knight, but the knight is pinned. So we're winning material. And so from the start, we're going to look at something else now. So we're playing the two knights. And now the early knight f6. Now, as we know, we have to play e5. And now after knight to e4, we have to play knight e2. We don't want to do that swap. And now, after bishop to g4, we have to attack the bishop immediately. In the past, we went through bishop takes, and everything that happens next, pawn takes back, and now the knight is in big trouble. However, we've never seen a move like bishop back to h5 or queen to b6. Bishop to h5 deserves a little mention because bishop to h5 kind of transposes into a very similar scenario to the usual Caro-Kann scenarios. g4, bishop has to move again, and now d3 attacks the knight. The knight is trapped, only has one square to go, which is c5. Now you play knight f4 with an attack on the bishop, and you're going to take the bishop. If the h-pawn moves anywhere, you can take the bishop, and black is completely devastated. Feel free to watch the entire saga of the Caro-Kann to see how to destroy this defense. e6 obviously by black, because you see there's also this scenario of playing e6 yourself in the future, maybe not right now. e6 also allows the normal development of the bishop. It's a completely normal move. c3 comes now, the idea of playing b4. Bishop e7, b4. The knight has to move again. Where? If knight goes to a6, h4, the idea of playing h5 and trap the bishop. h5 by black, and now that the h-pawn has moved, you can take this one. Pawn takes back, and the position is horrible. It's already evaluated +3, and it's very similar to scenario we've seen before. Black cannot develop a thing. Now, white goes on with d4, and you prepare the usual moves, like the queen and the bishop can reach these light squares and capitalize on this poor king. Pawn takes here doesn't help, because you can do this. Obviously, there's a bishop defending this knight as well. The knight is jumping to e7. And this cannot be stopped. Let's say queen d7, stopping the jump of the knight, but then you play bishop d3, attacking here. This cannot be stopped. Rook to h6. Final attempt of saving that, but now queen to g4, finalizing the attack over here. Position evaluated +5. So back in this position, after playing b4, what if the knight doesn't go to a6, but rather plays knight to d7? In order not to get like suffocated by his own pieces. h4 comes with a threat of h5. h6, what to do now? Okay, well, because the h-pawn moved, you can take this bishop, take back, and now this rook is on a closed file. That's the pattern to remember. One of the patterns to remember. d4, the center belongs to us. Okay, castle. That doesn't look too bad for black, but bishop d3 now targeting that pawn. We're gonna get in there. It's impossible to stop. This can be prevented. Black cannot really develop anything at all. A move like b6, the idea of playing c5 and try to strike the center at least. you take this one. And after c5, b5. Keep the center close if you can. a6, challenging it once again. g5. We're going all in with these pawns. That is the plan. If I don't know, if the pawn takes in b5, it opens the rook, but then you can take this pawn and you can take it from there. If the pawn takes over here, you take with the knight. Queen h5 is coming. The game plays itself. So let's go back from the start. Playing the two knights. Early knight f6, you attack it. Knight e4, knight e2. Bishop g4, you attack the bishop immediately. What if instead of bishop h5 or bishop f3, which we have seen, black play queen to b6, targeting checkmate. You have to play d4 to stop it. And now, a move like bishop f4, for instance, bishop f3 taking, loses immediately because the knight is trapped. The pawn is going to win the knight. So in this position, bishop h5, the bishop will have to save itself. However, knight f4. The bishop has to move again, and now e6. This can happen now because the black knight is not in c5 to put more defense over e6. e6 can happen. Knight a6 developing. Every other move leads to a disaster, as you can tell. And it's not like black could take this pawn, because there's this usual pattern of taking this bishop, pawn takes back. Yes, we are opening the black rook now, but this 4 silly pawns here prevent the development of the bishop anytime soon. This bishop is just never going to play. Now you play bishop to d3. You're going to play knight e5 later on after playing c3, for instance. Position evaluated as if white was up a piece. Black pieces are completely harmless and undevelopable. Here you also have a plan of castling. You don't have to worry. There's no attack here on anything. So back in this position, knight developing to a6. Potentially going to some squares. There are possibility to develop. There's not much else that can be done anyway. Now here you take this bishop, and when the pawn takes back, you play knight e5, threatening this extremely powerful check. Pawn takes, and now you play bishop to e2. Strangely enough, let's see what the plan is. If the knight goes back to f6, you play bishop to d3 with the threat of going to g6, meaning that this queen cannot take the pawn, and this is all unstoppable. If instead g5, for instance, right, you have this move, knight check, and then the king moves, and the knight can make forks, it's game over. G5 was maybe an idea to play g7 and then develop g6 and then develop the fianchetto bishop, but that doesn't work. Let's look at this move, c5. Okay, this seems to be making sense. Well, you play a4. A move like pawn takes loses immediately to bishop check. There's no way to block, and then the king will have to move, but then you can make forks and win a lot of material. So instead of that, what about knight to b4, finally continuing development? Besides, the knight is now also defending the square. c6, we don't have that bishop b5 move anymore. You play a5 attacking the queen. This is crucial. Queen to c7 has to go there, and now bishop check, knight to c6, a6, and that's a beautiful move because you got 2 pieces attacking this knight. You just need to remove one of the defenders, at least this pawn, and yeah, there's no coming back. Any taking here loses just immediately, or moving as well. Rook to c8 seems to be putting more defense. Queen to g4 capitalizes on so many crucial weaknesses. Let's make a brief mention of a line I never really showed, but it's like kind of like weaker. So early knight f6, c4, knight e2, knight e4, knight e2, and now immediately queen a5. It just doesn't really do anything, but it's the kind of move they play in order to stop the d pawn from moving. So it's a move I encounter a lot. So let's see. Now you play c3, and now nothing stops you from playing the central pawn. Queen to b6 now threatening checkmate d4. That's how you deal with it. Knight to a6 developing. a4. Do you recognize the patterns? These moves are going to happen all the time. Bishop to d7. We've never seen this kind of move. Knight to g3. That's how we challenge. This knight here in e4 is usually challenged by the pawn taking back in f3. Here now we play knight to g3. We're going to challenge it like that. If they take back, and now the rook's on open file. g6. It looks like our opponent will finally be able to develop the pieces this time. The dark suit bishop at least. Knight g5. And now we're threatening the pawn in h7. So h5 seems to stop everything. e6. Bishop takes. Fine. Take. And now queen to c2 finalizes the attack on that pawn. It's unstoppable. Rook to g8 seems to be defending it. a5. Attack the queen. Queen to c7. Bishop d3 capitalizes on that pawn. King to f7 seems to be doing the job. However, bishop to f4 attacks the queen. Queen to c8. Look at the black pieces. Look how stupid they are. The bishop can't develop anywhere. I mean, you may argue bishop g7, but then g6 gets taken. The e file is not possible. This queen doesn't have anywhere to go. This knight doesn't have anywhere to go. You're going to play g4 now and open the file for the rook. Black is not interested in opening the files, of course. He has to play e5. It gives away development. I mean, it gives away the pawn, but, you know, for another pawn. So g5, e4, and then you're going to take. Queen takes, and now rook h3. The idea is simply this one, rook g3, and now we're capitalizing on this pawn. It's all unstoppable. Even pawn taking here, you just do this. And it's not like the queen can give you a check. Obviously, don't move to here, because then the bishop can check you. If you go here to e2, you are losing this rook, but this check comes with a deadly checkmate. It's a mate net. One very quick mention before going to the next lines is the novelty is going to be, okay, so knight f6, e4, knight d7, right? We've seen this move in the past. So d4 and c5, this is an annoying variation. You're going to play knight g5 straight away. That is the move. And now we got all the threats of the world. If you remember, there's a crazy sharp lines happening here. Pawn taking in d4, we've never seen it before. Okay, well, e6 comes anyway. Obviously, you don't have to worry about the knight because pawn takes f7 is mate. Pawn kind of has to take, if you think about it. Knight to b5, saving the knight. We're giving away 2 pawns, and black has a huge pawn center. But it's going to be game over very soon. Also, the knight removes the square c7 from the queen. You're threatening knight e6, deadly position. Knight f6 seems to be doing everything. The bishop's defending here. The knight is stopping queen h5 check. Well, bishop f4 now you also understand the reason why knight b5. You're going to go to c7. Knight a6 seems to be stopping all of that. Well, now you recapture this pawn. Double attack over here. What about queen check? What to do? c3. Queen to b6. Double defense over e6. Well, game over. Check. This cannot be stopped. The knight is jumping to f7 as soon as the king moves. This knight going to d7, but that loses control over e6. d7, but then you can just take. Taking with the king is crazy. If that happens, you're gonna castle. The idea of playing simply rook e1 and capitalize on this pawn. So if rook to d8 with the idea of castling somehow, you're gonna play b4. This stops the knight from going to c5. If the knight had gone there, I mean, you can just play b4 anyway. And now you're gonna play if the king goes to c8, you play rook e1. Position evaluated +5. If instead, let's take some moves back. Here, straight after castling, we mentioned that rook d8 with the idea of artificially castle. What if black doesn't play that? It plays knight c5 straight away with the idea of going to e4 and swap with one of our knights to reduce the initiative on the attack on that pawn. As I said, we have to play b4 anyway. Knight to e4 now, but now queen to a4 check. The only thing that appears to be possible will be king c8 to avoid so much disaster. But now you can simply win this knight. The knight can't take you back without allowing the queen to infiltrate. So pawn has to take back. There's a triple pawn. And now queen to b3. Once again, put so much attack on this pawn. We're going to get there. And the position evaluated +5. Let's move on. So back here after the check, obviously king takes is stupid. Knight d7 seems normal. But now knight d2, e6. There's no coming back. These knights are horribly strong. The queen also has h5, d5 targets. You also have, so let's see, knight f6 for instance. Kind of does protect everything. But now you play queen to d3. If queen takes in b2 the pawn, then rook to b1. That's why queen d3 was played, to protect the rook. The rook going to the 7th rank, it's game over. If the knight goes to e4, then you just take this pawn. It's a completely winning position. And here, something else that needs to be understood is that there are no moves available for black. If black does leave the knight in f6, where it's still protecting these two weak squares, but still, you gotta understand that these knights cannot be removed from there. The king can't move, cannot castle, that bishop cannot develop. Now the plan here is to simply castle and and then carry on. If g6 now, our opponent might want to try to play bishop to h6, but you just castle. Oh, and by the way, h6 is pointless to mention because the queen can reach the squares. G6. So even earlier, instead of g6, h6. The most accurate way to continue, yes, the square g6 is weak, but you're going to play bishop e3 attacking the queen. Queen has to move. Obviously, b2 is silly because we've mentioned why. Queen to c6, and you can save the knight with knight d4, and then the other knight will have access to other squares as well. You still have g6 always available. So back to a couple of moves ago. What about well, g6? We know we have the castle. Bishop h6, rook a to e1. And now it looks like after knight e4, our opponent will be able to reduce the entire initiative of these two knights and carry on with the game. You gotta take. Now there's an attack on the bishop, so black has to take the knight, but now queen to d4 capitalizes on that weak rook. It's a devastating position. Let's leave it there. The last couple of lines we're going to see are the most boring, but nonetheless important. e6 straight away. And after d4, here's a move I encountered recently, and it's I mean, I've encountered already quite a few times in my latest blitz games, and obviously the idea is to remove the defender of this pawn in e4 so that black can play knight f6 with more impact on e4, and it's pinning the knight is going to take it. We can't defend the knight with the other knight, so I'm afraid that's going to happen. It only deserves a quick mention though, because it's not good. You're going to play e4, this is some sort of transposition in a French whenever now, something like that. Knight e7 develops, bishop d2, and after castle, attack the bishop. Bishop takes, take back, knight f5, and now bishop to b4, targeting the rook, exploiting the weakness on the weak squares, on the dark squares. Rook e8, h4. See, it's a transposition into a whenever. That's why I'm not going to go deeply in this, because basically study the whenever, the French whenever, and then you'll know what to play against this. Knight a6, attacking the bishop. Well, take it. We don't care. We hate knight. Queen to d2 developing. Rook to b8. Not much to do for black. There's no way to get through because this bishop is offering, that's why bishop b4 is offering crucial control of the square c5. Castle. Queen b6. And now a5 is a big threat. I mean, not too bad, but you're going to play b3 now. It's the best move. Puts more control. Bishop to d7. g4 attacking the knight. The knight will have to move. Knight back. And now bishop to c5. Attacking the weak pawn in a7. Queen to b7 defending. h5. Inevitably going up. h6. And now rook d to g1. The idea is one and simple, and it's unstoppable, and it's g5. So let's see, a5 with the idea of a4. g5. We're going to leave it there. I only did a brief mention of this because it was some sort of transposition. I mean, at the end of the day, all defenses, all openings in chess, they're all plagiarism of each other. Once you know how to deal against one, then you're going to realize that there's always a connection with other openings and defenses that look pretty much like that one. Last but not least, the most problematic of all, and I have done videos about this, but see here, pawn takes in e4. This is the main move. Knight takes and now knight f6. Once again, the main move. And I've offered the repertoire on what to do about taking the knight and then pawn takes back. It's just too boring. There's a swap. And now I'm going to offer a different repertoire. This is the very first time I ever do it in my entire channel. I always fight with the same openings. I will never say, for example, in a certain position whilst playing white, you can play this move or this move. No, I'm always going to show the top engine move. So here, instead of knight f6, I will suggest a new repertoire starting with knight g3. We're going to play knight g3, refusing the swap in order to keep more initiative, because otherwise we swap everything and it's just a boring endgame and black is achieving what they want. Besides, I think maybe I will delete the videos where I take the knight in f6. So let's see now. There's two moves. I mean, there's one move that needs to be seen, which is the main move, h5. A move like bishop to g4, it's a transposition. You just attack it, and you're going to end up... It's a position that arises from other positions from the Caro-Kann, so we're not going to look at this. h5, now that's the main move of the black player in this type of position. Okay, h3 is coming. h4, attacking the knight, knight e2. And even though this is what they play as black against this opening, what you need to understand is that this pawn is really silly. Bishop g5 will win the pawn. So we'll see what to do now. Bishop to f5, let's continue. d4. And after e6 to develop knight to c3. So we've been moving the knights a bit, but at the cost of breaking our opponent right to properly castle. There's no way the black can castle properly because knight g3 induced the square, the move h5, h4, which is thematic. We're going to see other stuff maybe in the future. Two options we're going to briefly mention, and then we'll close this video. Bishop to e7 or bishop to d6, normal moves. Okay, bishop e7, you play bishop d3, you challenge that bishop, you want to take it, open the files, and this king is on borrowed time. So after take, knight b d7, castle, and after queen to b6, developing, putting pressure on b2 and d4, bishop g5, and we're going to win the pawn. And by the way, it was inevitable. You couldn't stop it from happening. Knight d5 appears to be doing the job, but you play knight e4, putting more defense on this knight, although it looks like it can be traded. If, for example, black castles, you've got bishop takes, right? So if black castles long, you take, and after take back, then knight d6 check, and then you're attacking the square f7. So that's a tactic. Always watch out for these things. Remember, I'm always showing the best moves. If your opponent doesn't do the moves I'm showing, then there's like huge blunders. Although I also show the bigger mistakes the opponent can do, but only very briefly. Bishop g5, now bishop takes and reducing the initiative, and also not allowing that tactic and preserving the pawn in h4. What's going on here? Knight e takes in g5, and now after knight back to f6, because there's no other moves. You see, you might think, okay, what about knight f6? Here, just completely normal looking move. Well, that loses immediately to a tactic. Take, it's a sacrifice of the knight, queen g6 check, and now moving to e7 means queen check once again, and we also take a look at a disaster. What about king to f8? Knight g5 does the job. You're threatening simply checkmate. Obviously, knight queen c7 to stop the checkmate is met with knight check, and then you're winning the queen. If you ask the engine what the best move for black is exactly queen c7. So you're gonna have to give up the queen, take the game from there. So back in this position, knight here doesn't work. What about knight? This one, the knight in 5 to f6. Black cannot castle because knight f7, right? So this seemed to be happening. However, c4, queen to c7, rook f2 e1. It's so fluid development, so smooth. Knight to b6 by black. What's gonna happen here? And now, oh no, it's the sound of the ambulance. It's just going to arrest me. The crime. I'm too good at this game. No, I'm kidding. I'm only creating lines with the engine, so this is not me. But then sometimes I do play, and I do remember these lines, and then I play like an engine. Anyway, rook e6. Boom! It's an incredible move. What are you going to do about that? Take, and now queen g6 check. King has to move. Obviously, knight e6 is a threat, so king f8 is not possible. King to d7, and now queen takes here. And it's game over very soon. King moves, but then you have a fork. You can take this queen. So let's leave it there for the moment.